Hey guys, Cody here again with Mercury Rising Astrology. I wanted to come on today and talk a little bit about the upcoming Sun-Mercury conjunction in the sign of Aquarius. Now we have a lot of Aquarian energy happening right now. The Sun had moved into Aquarius. We're in Aquarius season. Pluto has been there for a minute now. Mercury has ingressed into Aquarius. We just had a new moon in Aquarius. So there's lots of Aquarian energy, and I've done a couple videos on Aquarius already. But because Mercury is conjoining the Sun in Aquarius, it is starting the new Mercury cycle. And so that cycle is going to be infused with Aquarian themes, and that will unfold over the next several months through Mercury's retrograde back into where it makes a superior conjunction with the Sun again. So because this area of our charts are being activated in a way and seeded with a new cycle, I wanted to kind of explore some of the themes that might be coming up with the new Sun-Mercury cycle. The Mercury-Sun conjunction will happen on February 9th of this year, and it'll happen at 21 degrees of Aquarius. So if you have Aquarius in any of the angles, first house, 10th house, 4th house, 7th house, this might be particularly potent for you, or if you have any planets in the fixed signs or in Aquarius even. But it will affect us all in some way a bit differently. Some might just feel it more pronounced than others. Mercury ruled individuals may feel it a little bit more than others. And so at the end of this video, I'll go through each of the rising signs and where this Mercury-Sun conjunction is being initiated and seated in your chart. So first off, let's start with the basics of Mercury. Mercury is the planet of the intellect, of communication, thoughts, ideas, how we communicate those ideas, how we exchange ideas. It's everything from, messages and letters to phone calls to the internet and emails, any books, anything that relates to our ideas and our thoughts and how we communicate those to other people. Mercury also rules things like commerce and trade. So it's going to be business. That's where we get the term mercantilism. It's the root word Mercury. So anything where we have an exchange of goods or services, just like if we have an exchange of ideas, that's Mercury ruled. Mercury also rules things like travel and movement. It's the swiftest of the planets, and it moves through its cycle the quickest between direct and retrograde. And so there's associations with travel and movement. Mercury was also associated with Hermes and being a psychopomp and the ability to guide souls between the worlds, between the divine realms, the earthly realms, and the underworld. And it was one of the only planets that was able to navigate those realms in a way that was smooth, and he did it quite often. And so that's where we get these themes of like travel and movement and motion. Some of the qualities that Mercury has are cleverness, articulateness. It can be quick-witted and adaptable, and very resourceful. Now, there can be an element of deceit and trickery or cunningness and manipulation associated with Mercury, as well as being overly mental and scattered maybe a little bit and not as much in tune with their emotional kind of sensitive realm. For the Sun, some of the themes that, are significations of the Sun are going to be things like illumination, visibility, clarity. It's what brings light to things. It's what shines upon, the world and gives us an ability to see things clearly. When the Sun isn't there, things are dark and obscured. So there's this element of, bringing things to light and being able to see and bringing a kind of clarity to a situation. The Sun is the center of the solar system, and its gravity is kind of what keeps everything in motion. And so the Sun can be like a central organizing principle. And to the ancients, this indicated a rational spirit or something of a divine wisdom that holds things in place. It can also be associated with things like honor, reputation, nobility, generosity, and magnanimity. But it can also be associated with things like arrogance, excessive pride, and even a little bit of authoritarianism. So there's some shadow aspects to the sun and Mercury both, just like there is with anything else to be mindful of. Now for a conjunction, that means that two planets are in the same spot in the sky. So they are meeting, if you will. They are coming together. And for the ancients, this was a joining or uniting of the planetary forces and energy. The conjunction, when it's direct, in my opinion, is a beginning of that cycle process. And then we'll retrograde, where we review and look over and reevaluate, move forward again before we integrate and end the cycle and then start all over again. So when Mercury conjoins the sun exactly, this is what the ancients called CAZIMI, and it meant in the heart of the sun. And as Mercury is getting closer and closer to the sun before its exact conjunction, it goes through a process of burning, like we call it under the beams, and then combustion, and then CAZIMI. And so there's this feeling of burning away, the previous cycle or the things that are no longer working. And then when Mercury becomes CAZIMI at the heart of the sun, in the same exact spot as the sun, there's this sense of purification and renewal and empowerment, where it's like the phoenix rising from the ashes. Now it's a nascent energy, and it's an energy in potential, because this Mercury still has to get out from underneath the beams of the sun before it can be visible again. So it implies this hidden, secretive, kind of mysterious process of alchemy, where the planetary energies of Mercury, when meeting the sun, gets purified, renewed, and initiated into a new cycle. So it's kind of what we're going to be looking at in regards to Aquarian themes moving forward. So I did an entire video on Aquarius and the themes of Aquarius. So if you want a more in-depth kind of nuanced understanding of how we arrive at the Aquarian themes, go check out that video. I think it's like 30 or 40 minutes long, but it delves into all the traditional significations of Aquarius and how we arrive at them. I'm not going to go super in depth here on this video, because that video does exist and I don't feel like boring myself or you and saying the same thing over and over again. But I will hit the highlights real quick in case you're stumbling upon this video and you don't have time or don't want to stop and go watch that and then come back. So Aquarius is a masculine fixed air sign ruled by Saturn. And so being masculine or yang, we don't mean masculine in a sexual sense. Masculine meaning active, or yang versus the feminine principle, the divine masculine versus the divine feminine. So with Aquarius, we're dealing with the divine masculine. It's active, it's intellectual, it's idea driven. A lot of that comes from the fact that it's an air sign as well. Being an air sign, it's associated with the mind, the intellect, communication, and social connections. Being fixed, it stabilizes those thoughts. And establishes long-term ideologies and critiques those long-term ideologies. It looks at societal frameworks and enduring collective knowledge. Because it's fixed, it can be persistent and unyielding in its ideologies, but it preserves and holds on to their ideas and principles even when they contradict the norms or feel like they are, too progressive for the standard, like status quo. Being ruled by Saturn gives Aquarius a distant, detached, objective kind of feeling. It is the most distant outer planet, and it wants to reconstruct systems, whereas Capricorn wants to maybe build and establish systems. Aquarius wants to critique and look at those systems, and then that's part of being it's part of the difference between being an earth sign and an air sign. And so Saturn deals with thresholds and boundaries, and in Capricorn it wants to establish those thresholds and those boundaries, and in Aquarius it critiques and questions and wants to move past those boundaries and thresholds. So that's one way of looking at Saturn's rulership over a masculine fixed air sign. The sun's detriment is also here in Aquarius, and so this lends Aquarian energy to want to critique personal power or authoritarian power. And it has this sense of wanting to favor broader systems and collective advancement over the individual whims. That's kind of some of the themes of, Aquarius broadly. We're going to get more into it as we talk through this in terms of the Mercury-Sun conjunction, but Those are just broad themes of Aquarius. In a mundane sense, Aquarius rules things like revolutions, reforms, intellectual movements, shifts in leadership, science and technological advances, things of that nature. And you can kind of see how the Saturnian air fixed quality comes into that to kind of give us a lay of the ground in terms of Aquarian energy. Given that Mercury has already come into Aquarius, we've kind of seen these Mercurial Aquarian themes come up, especially in the US where I'm at, in terms of politics and culture and technology and what's happening kind of in the realm of public awareness. And so I wanted to touch on some of those things because as Mercury conjoins the Sun, these themes might come to light. There might be a little bit more clarity. There might be a little bit more reworking of these issues and a more clear understanding of how it's unfolding over the Mercury cycle. So one of the things I have written down is that there's been significant policy reforms so far through executive orders with this administration, kind of reforming or looking at or critiquing the previous administration's work and what they've done. And you can agree or disagree with it. I'm not here to pass judgment either way, but just this idea that we have the authority of one administration being critiqued and questioned by the next administration is a very Aquarian theme. One of the things I wrote down is this drive towards energy independence and innovating in terms of the oil and gas industry and creating more technology so that we can have more independent energy production. That's one way we're reforming and using technology in a way to arguably help the collective in some ways. There's been a focus with this administration on deregulating businesses and allowing for a more business-friendly environment to foster economic growth. That's a change from the previous administration. There's been an examination of agencies and their effectiveness. There's been a pause on some spending, kind of controversial. There's been a look at getting rid of some agencies within the governmental structures. And so this idea of challenging what would be considered traditional governmental structures or the previous status quo in terms of authority is very Aquarian. Even just looking at the past treaties, like the Panama Canal thing is coming up, the Greenland thing is coming up, the renaming of the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America, reconsidering US international interest. This is all very Aquarian. You're taking what was considered traditional status quo and you're critiquing it and you're reforming it. Whether you agree or not, it's a reform, it's a change to hopefully make it better in the long run. Another thing that I came up with just by looking at the news cycle, and this might change by the time this comes out, but things are changing fast. Jupiter's in Gemini, shit changes fast. But with immigration, there's been significant changes with this administration to the flow of immigration and the immigration policies and a willingness and a urge to reform them. And it's interesting that some of this has been seen as kind of calloused and kind of uncompassionate and cruel in a way because Aquarius is ruled by Saturn. It's a fixed air sign. It's detached. There's not a lot of emotion in Aquarius. And so when you're reforming systems from a big picture level, it's hard to get the emotional human cost of things. And that's one of the shadow sides of Aquarius that needs to be considered and needs to be reconciled and balanced, is like, how do we implement these big policy reforms in terms of immigration, in terms of gas and oil production, in terms of foreign policy? How can we reform this in a way that's better for everybody, but also still compassionate and part of our human? And it's a very Aquarian difficulty. Like, the Aquarian wants to just reform things and kind of put things through the meat grinder without necessarily considering the emotional cost. I have 3 planets in Aquarius. I have my moon, my Mars, and my Venus, and my North Node. And so I definitely resonate with not, with needing to practice a little bit more compassion. A friend can come to me with a problem that they're emotionally distraught about, and I'm already trying to see the bigger picture framework and like, what is the bigger meaning of this? How can we make the most of this? How does this fit into this? Instead of just allowing a space for those emotions and acknowledging that there are real world human feelings that are involved in a lot of these decisions, whether the actions are right or wrong, or you agree or disagree. we also have to acknowledge the feelings involved. And I think that's part of an Aquarian dichotomy that we're seeing right now. Another thing that caught my eye was crypto. There's been an executive order establishing innovation in terms of technology and establishing a group to review digital asset regulations. And there's even been a consideration of creating a national Bitcoin reserve. So having technology, and then you have currency, which is ruled by Mercury, and you're looking at these reforms and these agencies to critique and view how that can happen. We have an establishing of new oversight committees to look into these things. We have a question of whether or not we're establishing a new policy for reserve to kind of get ahead of the Bitcoin kind of cryptocurrency thing that's occurring. So that's an interesting thing to keep an eye out on. And lastly, I have AI. Ever since Mercury moved into Aquarius, I don't know if you guys have heard, but DeepSeek, which is a Chinese AI company, has really disrupted the AI space and the tech space. I think it was close to the Mercury conjunct Pluto, actually, which is pretty spot on. But it's a breakthrough. We don't know what the true cost of it is, but if it is true, the DeepSeek app came at a significantly lower cost to develop than what a lot of American AI companies are spending in order to develop their AI softwares like ChatGPT and things like that. However, there are some severe censorship issues with the app, which is also kind of an interesting Aquarian theme, wanting to be an ideologue and control the narrative. So for instance, if you ask, DeepSeek about Tiananmen Square, it doesn't give you information. It tells you that it's not able to do that. And so we're starting to see a lot of these Aquarian, especially when Pluto moved in, man, it's like, I feel like a lot of these Aquarian themes popped off. And now that the sun is in there, we had the new moon in there, Mercury's moving in there, it's about to be conceiving the sun. A lot of this stuff is really kind of popping off. And note that all of this is trine by sign to Jupiter and Gemini, which I think is like, a trine is a harmonious, easy flow, and Jupiter and Gemini is just like all the information, all the knowledge, everywhere, all at once. And then it's like fueling this Aquarian fucking craziness. I don't know. It just seems like a lot, to be honest. I see a lot of Pisces stuff happening right now, but it seems this age right now seems very Aquarian, very air. And so that's kind of the mundane themes to kind of look out for as we go into this Mercury conjunction with the sun. How are these themes going to become more clear? How are these themes going to be purified or renewed? Or how are these themes going to be effectuated? When Mercury meets the sun, it's in a place of authority. So how are these themes going to be emanated out to the masses through authority, through the Mercury retrograde cycle? How are these unfolding when it turns retrograde? How do we need to reevaluate what we set to do in Aquarius? Like we put all these policies out, we put all these reforms out. What's sticking? What's not sticking? What's not working? What do we need to walk back? What do we need to get more emotionally in tune with? These are kind of what I see unfolding for the Mercury cycle coming up. So given those broad themes that we just discussed in terms of Mercury, the Sun conjunction in Aquarius, most simply and most broadly speaking, this is a moment of mental or intellectual clarity and a initiation or birth into a new cycle regarding mercurial themes. And imbued in that cycle is going to be these themes of intellect, frameworks, societal collective systems, a detached and objective way of looking. It's this moment of initiating perhaps big ideas or systemic thinking rather than individual thinking. This will seed kind of a detached, scientific, objective energy into a kind of logical discourse around things, hopefully for the better. There's going to be an emphasis on reforming or critiquing systems in a way that is methodical and structured. Like being a fixed air sign ruled by Saturn, it's often called the sign of rebellion or being the rebel. And that is true. It does rebel in a sense, but because of its fixity and its Saturnian nature, the rebellion is a little bit more methodical and a little bit more structured and a little bit more tactical, if you will. It's making long-lasting, enduring changes to the system over time. What I think would be a more kind of rebellious sign would be the Jupiter-ruled Sagittarius. It's a fire sign, it's double-bodied, it's ruled by Jupiter. It's like that's screaming like wildfire, right? It's screaming like, let's go rebel and have a good time. And it's a different kind of rebellion in Aquarius. Aquarius is a more of an intellectual, ideological, systemic, collective rebellion. It might also ignite a process of challenging centralized authority. Aquarius has a tendency to view the collective over the individual. And if you think of Leo being ruled by the sun and the center of authority, then Aquarius with the sun in detriment is this challenging or this critiquing of central authority. It's like, okay, well, what exists at the fringes and at the margins, and what can be integrated in to the central like organizing principle in order for this system to be better and more effective. Sometimes if you think about, the sun as the center pole of structure in which all things revolve around, it's not going to evolve, or it's not going to grow, and it's not going to become better unless we're considering the things on the outside, the things on the fringe, and making judgment calls on what works and what doesn't, and critiquing where are we leaving things out that we need to integrate, and where are we leaving things out that need to stay out. And with Saturn ruling things like boundaries and thresholds and being at the edge of the solar system in terms of the ancient thought, with the sun in Aquarius, there's this critique of authority and this critique on centralized power, and maybe an emphasis on decentralizing that knowledge, maybe through alternative media or shifts in public discourse, or questioning kind of the status quo in terms of who's in charge and doing the governance. Because this is a seeding moment and a moment of beginnings and initiation, it's a great time for long-term intellectual projects to take foot. Policy revision, scientific breakthroughs, reevaluating the structure of communication and information flows, I think will have a prominent play here in this Mercury cycle. I think we're already seeing a little bit of it with Mercury moving into Aquarius. I'll talk about that in a minute. But this is just, again, a purification and an ignition of a new cycle of those themes. There might be an emphasis on rational detachment and innovation and objective thought, rather than embodied emotional kind of reactions, at least on the mercurial, realm. And this may mean even laying out blueprints for new frameworks and big picture problem solving. Aquarius can see things from the outside and can see kind of the objective workings of things. So it's a great time to see which part of your plans aren't working and which parts need adjustments, and whether that's collectively or individually. Just one thing I want to briefly touch on, because I think I'm going to do a separate video for it. I was tracing Mercury's cycle, this synodic cycle, and I came up with some interesting insights. So after the conjunction or CAZIMI in Aquarius, Mercury will continue through Aquarius and move into Pisces, go into Aries, turn retrograde, conjoin the sun again in Aries, move back into Pisces, go back into Aries, go into Taurus, go into Gemini, where it ends the cycle and it starts a new cycle in Gemini, an air sign again. So we're not going to be done with air for a while. I think the next Mercury Sun CAZIMI that starts the new cycle is going to be in Virgo. And so then maybe we'll get some earth and be able to ground some shit. But for the next, I would say for a better part of this year, it's going to be air as in terms of Mercury and the synodic cycle. So I came up with some interesting, just quick themes to keep in mind as Mercury moves through these signs. So once we move out of the themes of Aquarius, where these things are seeded and initiated, Mercury moves into Pisces, and these structures that we established, where that became clear at the CAZIMI in Aquarius, are going to begin to dissolve, or maybe get, diluted or distorted, or somehow, a little bit more scattered. And this will allow, hopefully, for a more emotionally in-tuned or intuitive approach, and maybe some new insights that are also kind of a little bit more emotionally linked to the more intellectual process that we began at the conjunction. But this might actually lead to a little bit more confusion. Mercury is in its detriment and fall in Pisces, and it'll end up meeting Saturn. So I think a lot of these things will end up being tested a little bit, right after this cycle begins. But that's kind of what we look for in Pisces. Like some of these structures that we thought were in place and we thought were, you know, established in the norm for now are going to be kind of shifty. Then it'll move into Aries, where the fog of Pisces kind of separates a little bit, and there's going to be this sense of bold action, this sense of urgency, the sense of pioneering, maybe strong-willed opinions, or bold communications, or bold actions in terms of how we communicate, how we trade, the markets, technology. It'll be interesting to see how that happens, because halfway through, not even halfway through, I think it's at 10 degrees of Aries, Mercury will turn retrograde, where the cycle will turn inward and there'll be a moment of reflection. And it's almost like all the forward action that we had in Aries now hit the brakes and we have to review. And there will be an examination of the aggressive, kind of self-focused, bold nature of Aries. And maybe this is caused by a rash decision or impulsive speech, or decisions made by force or compulsion. And there'll be like wait, we need to review this. And so that's kind of starts the retrograde period. And then it retrogrades back into Pisces, where it'll soften that kind of aggressiveness of Aries and allow a more internal realignment to the Mercury process. And this will be a little bit more contemplative. We'll be reconsidering our intuition, our emotions, our dreams, our subconscious, and how they relate to the ideological frameworks that we may have initiated at the conjunction in Aquarius. Finally, Mercury will turn direct in Pisces. It'll move out of Pisces. It'll move back into Aries, where it's more refined now. It's survived the retrograde process. It looked itself in the mirror, hopefully. It looked at its shadows. It reevaluated. It reconsidered. And now it's time to move forward in a bold and fiery way that has momentum and that has a little bit more clarity and more actionability around it, hopefully without as much as the shadow aspects that would have existed prior to the retrograde. Hopefully a little less angry, a little less conflictual, a little less aggressive, maybe a little bit more tempered, but with a courageous kind of warrior spirit rather than a shadowy, like tyrant kind of vibe. As it moves out of Aries, it'll move into Taurus, where this will ground and stabilize the ideas and the communication and the thoughts and the big, bold plans that we created blueprints for during the Aquarian cycle, during the Aquarian conjunction, and we reviewed during the previous 2 signs. And so this will allow the Aquarian framework that was established to meet practical application, and our plans are hopefully solidified in some way, in a practical, tangible way. And by that point, Mercury will finish its way through Taurus. It'll move into Gemini, where it's at its home. And, you know, this cycle that was started in Aquarius now begins a new one. And this will be in a mode of exploration, a mode of rapid exchange and curiosity. It's like ready to disseminate, ready to explore and learn more. And so that's kind of like a breakdown of what Mercury is going to go through this cycle. And then, of course, it'll start in Gemini, it starts a new cycle. And so that cycle will be a little less detached and a little less objective, perhaps, and a little less collective and a little bit more personal and a little bit more curious and adaptive and fun and less rigid. And Mercury is at home in Gemini. It's one of its home signs. And so there might be this tendency to be a little bit more comfortable with the resources there and a little less dogmatic and a little less rigid, like a fixed air sign ruled by Saturn. So that's kind of where I see the unfolding of that. So given everything that we've talked about, think in terms of your personal life, how these themes might play out, but also think on a mundane level, some of the political and social and societal economic ramifications that we talked about and how those might unfold over the, you know, next several months, according to those signs in the process. I just realized the sun is like, it's the afternoon and the sun sets, and it's, the lighting through this video is going to be all whack, but whatever. I hope the information is good enough to just ignore that. All right, let's get into what this Mercury-Sun conjunction in Aquarius will mean for you and your chart based on your rising sign. I'm going to start off with my Aquarius risings because this is happening in your first house, and that's pretty powerful, and you'll probably be the most in tune with this energy. And so the ancients looked at the first house as being something that represents you in the chart, yourself, your identity, your body, your health, your constitution, your temperament, your personality. It's really the house that is only about you in the chart. You know, the other houses are about other aspects of your life, but the first house is really just you. And so this conjunction is a powerful seeding moment for self-reinvention. Mercury and the Sun illuminate how you think about yourself and how others perceive you. And being ruled by Saturn, you know, the Saturnian influence may make you feel driven to refine your personal goals and develop your intellectual authority and how you identify with that, or even establish new routines or, you know, systems of operating that enhance your long-term vision and what your goals are. The positive potential for this conjunction in the first house for you is an enhanced sense of self-awareness, an objective look at what's actually going on in your life, a sense of clarity and a sense of understanding about how the structures that you've built are influencing what you're doing and how you're navigating life. It's a great time to be aware of the creation of your strategies that align with your principles and your ambitions, and how are you embodying those and living those out. One of the pitfalls I would be mindful of is getting too stuck in your head, overanalyzing every little piece of who you are and critiquing every single aspect, you know, instead of taking practical steps towards change. So balance this introspection and this objective clarity with a little bit more embodied action. That'll give you, and this might unfold over the Mercury cycle, so this might be something you have to learn or refine, but just something to keep in mind. For my Capricorn risings, this is happening in your second house of money, resources, possessions, values, and self-worth. This conjunction plants the seed to perhaps a new approach to your finances and your material resources. Mercury encourages us to strategize around your wealth and your budgeting and your investments and how you're spending money and allocating resources, while the Sun may shed light or clarity on what truly holds value for you. Saturn also rules this house for you. It also rules your ascendant. So it ultimately supports long-term planning and sustainability. And so if used wisely, this moment can kind of bring a clarity and a lasting sense of financial stability. But the risk here for you in this conjunction in your second house is being overly rigid in your thinking or overly ideological in how you're managing your money. And you might miss creative opportunities that arise in order to restructure that area, or you might be weighed down by this scarcity mindset. Saturn can rule things like fears and insecurities. And so there might be a tendency to get held in by rigid, you know, scarcity mindsets that aren't allowing you to be a little bit more flexible with your money. So stay a little bit adaptable in your finances while sticking to your core principles and coming up with a plan that not only, you know, gets you where you need to be, but also allows for a little bit of flexibility. For my Sagittarius risings, this is happening in your third house of, you know, local environment or immediate environment, learning, communication. This is ultimately a reset on how you communicate or engage in your local environment in your everyday life. Mercury and the Sun in Aquarius encourage kind of an intellectual growth through structured learning or networking or writing and communicating. And so you might initiate new projects involving teaching or contracts or community initiatives, something that is, you know, in your local environment that needs to be adjusted systemically, or the way you learn or approach learning and knowledge and communication needs to be adjusted or needs to be looked at in terms of what frameworks are working and what frameworks are not working. The positive side of this conjunction in your third house includes forming lasting connections, perhaps that develop, you know, over time and create a sense of mental clarity and are centered around collective values or knowledge and wisdom. And so one thing to kind of look out for us in terms of like a shadow element is becoming too caught up in abstract ideas and losing touch with practical day-to-day realities, and balancing this need to ground your thoughts into tangible actions so that you can make the most of this cycle. Aquarius can have this energy of being a little too detached and a little too up in the air, so to speak. So being able to ground your ideas and your critiques and your innovations into a way that's tangible and practical is really important. For my Scorpio risings, this is happening in your fourth house. It's happening in the house of home, parents, family, and property. So it's seeding a new cycle with those themes, more or less of personal foundations. So I would keep an eye out for the ability to create stability, perhaps through restructuring your living situation or addressing your familial responsibility, or thinking about how your mental constructs are, influenced by your family dynamics and how you grew up, and vice versa. You might have a moment of clarity where you see a property investment coming to fruition, or there might be some kind of ancestral connections. You might get on ancestry.com and start making some ancestral connections that kind of help you build this framework or understand yourself in a different way in terms of home and family. The positive potential here for the fourth house is a chance to build a strong, sustainable, base for future growth. The ancients saw the fourth house as kind of like foundational. And so whenever you change the foundation of something, it's going to have ripple effects throughout the rest of the chart. And so creating a strong base for sustainable growth over time that progresses and innovates and moves forward towards an ideal will have ripple effects throughout the rest of your life. The caution here in the fourth house is too much of an emotional detachment, as always with Aquarius, focusing too much on rational solutions that may alienate loved ones or prevent deep emotional engagement, or approaching things that, like I talked about earlier in the video, not taking into account the human aspect of things, the emotional aspect, the felt sense of things, and just trying to fix things logically in your head. For my Libra risings, your fifth house, creativity, children, pleasure, romance, fun, all the good things in life. This is starting a new creative cycle with Mercury and the Sun conjoining in your fifth house. And there might be this opportunity to lay the groundwork for projects that require both structure and inspiration. This may be forward-thinking creative projects. This might be, a creative project that you were working on that needs to be reworked and revised and critiqued so that it can be better and built upon. It might be a time where you're reassessing your approach to romance and what brings you pleasure. And there might be this emphasis on intellectual engagement, and connecting with people in a way that's through ideas and through concepts versus, fleeting emotional highs and lows and the roller coasters of things. With Aquarius ruling your fifth house, you probably find joy in the intellectual conversations of things. You probably find, a sense of creativity in the intellectual realms. You might find pleasure in that realm. And so this might be a time where your communication and your thoughts are aligned and clear in a way where you can express yourself in a way that's ideologically creative. This can bring, if harnessed well, a clarity and a purpose to your creative or your speculative endeavors, or the way you raise children or children in your life. The caution here is becoming too rigid or serious in your pursuit of pleasure and enjoyment. You might stifle the spontaneity that naturally belongs to the fifth house because you're being too in your head and too ideologically rigid about what pleasure means and what it must look like, and it's not meeting this ideal. And so be mindful of that. Allow room for joy and experimentation during this process. For my Virgo risings, this is happening in your sixth house of work or mundane tasks that you need for everyday life, illness, health, routines. It marks a turning point in these areas because it's starting a new cycle. And so Mercury's analytical nature here aligns with the discipline of Saturn, and it might make this an ideal time to refine your daily habits, streamline your workflows, or improve your physical well-being. How are the ideas that you hold about the world and work and health holding you back? What needs to be reworked and critiqued in order to create a more sustainable framework that allows for a productive work and a productive health life and a productive routine, but doesn't feel like a burden, that doesn't quite feel like drudgery? In what ways can you improve these areas through communication or through using your mind and your intellect to come up with ways to solve problems? this could be adopting sustainable practices, changing your health routines, anything like that. There's a risk here with a little bit of perfectionism, getting stuck in over planning and overworking yourself in order to get the perfect plan in place, or in order to get the perfect health routine, or in order to make sure that my workflow is exactly how I need it to be. Just remember that consistent effort and putting in the work and showing up every day is more important and often more effective and beats unattainable ideals that keep us stuck in planning mode and not getting us to like move forward with what we need to do. For my Leo risings, this Mercury Sun conjunction is happening in your 7th house of relationships, partnerships, whether business partnerships, romantic partnerships, any kind of one-on-one partnership. And so in your 7th house, this conjunction will reset the dynamics perhaps of your key partnerships and your key relationships. And with Saturn ruling Aquarius, this can offer a structured moment for agreements or commitments, and Mercury will bring a sense of rationality to your communication or to your writings. So this would be a good time to clarify your expectations in relationships, to negotiate any contracts, to establish an intellectual rapport in your relationships, and maybe even question like how your belief systems and your ideals and your mental constructs around relationships, how they affect how you relate to other people and how other people relate to you, and kind of that dynamic of how your beliefs shape your relationships. One of the positive potentials of this alignment for you includes lasting agreements, perhaps among partners, or more balanced connections based on shared ideas and shared visions. One of the cautions that I would advise of is being too emotionally detached in your partnerships and focusing too much on logic and connecting the dots, because this could kind of alienate partners or kind of, stand people a bit off and prevent a deeper intimacy and a deeper connection in your partnerships. So make sure to balance the intellectual rigor and intellectual honesty and the exploration of the mental realms with a more empathetic, emotional, and, intuitive kind of flowing aspect in your relationships as well, to make sure that they're balanced. For my Cancer risings, it's happening in your 8th house of shared resources, inheritances, I don't know why I can't say that. Inheritances, debts, intimacy, and like psychological subconscious transformation. So this conjunction will shift a focus to your shared finances, your debts, and any kind of psychological transformative experiences. Mercury and the Sun will bring perhaps mental clarity to these topics, and maybe even psychological healing. Maybe there are some kind of fears or doubts or insecurities that you're working with in the 8th house that, the logic and the light of the sun will come together and illuminate for you, that will unfold over this Mercury cycle that we talked about earlier, and give you a sense of clarity on those topics, whether that's shared resources and finances, or whether that's intimacy between you and your partner, or any kind of like psychological trauma or healing that comes up. This conjunction can be helpful in helping you restructure your financial agreements, or diving into deeper research on spiritual and esoteric or hidden secretive matters to get a better, or different perspective on how you might be psychologically operating and some of your kind of psychological blind spots. The positive outcome here for this Mercury conjunction with the Sun cycle is greater control over your shared resources. If it illuminates things that aren't working or that need to be shed or need to be kind of reformed, you'll have greater control over that area, and you might have a stronger sense of empowerment through self-discovery in that process. Be cautious of becoming overly, cold or calculating during this process, especially in the emotionally sensitive areas. The 8th house can be kind of an emotionally sensitive area, and it can be hard for an air sign to navigate that area because they're too in their head and not enough like in their field. So just be mindful of being too in your head. Find ways to integrate both your logic and your intuition. Being a Cancer rising, I know you have intuition. Don't get too heady during this time. For my Gemini risings, this is happening in your 9th house of higher knowledge, philosophy, travel, religion. It's the joy of the sun. So it this Mercury Sun conjunction initiates a new cycle in this area and may encourage philosophical exploration, a pursuit of higher wisdom. If Mercury is the planet of learning and the ninth house is knowledge, you can see that there might be a pursuit of higher education, or there might be an emphasis on long distance travel that has an effect on your ideologies or your beliefs or how you see the world. Mercury's analytical power here, combined with Saturn's discipline and the sun's illumination, supports perhaps a deep engagement or study of some kind of project or curriculum that requires kind of an intellectual endurance or tenacity of the mental realm. This might even lead you to being engaged with legal matters, some kind of cultural exchange or academic pursuit or religion or spiritual practices and exploration. There is a potential here for a renewed sense of purpose and a greater wisdom in how your ideological frameworks and your ways of seeing the world on a collective level influence your beliefs, and vice versa, how your beliefs influence how you engage in the broader world. The risk here is being overly intellectually rigid in those beliefs and in those philosophies and holding on too tightly to ideas that no longer serve your growth. So stay open to new perspectives, and doesn't mean you have to let everything in, but don't shut everything out. You might be, not might be, you probably are missing something that somebody else has the answer to. So being able to stay open to new information and being able to integrate that into your frameworks of beliefs and knowledge and wisdom might be helpful. For my Taurus risings, this is happening in your 10th house of public life, career, reputation. So this conjunction will focus on your career ambitions and what you're doing out in the world. And so Mercury's influence here with the sun encourages strategic planning and an intellectual type of leadership. And being in a sign ruled by Saturn, this can help you build long-term professional stability. You might see how you're engaging with your career in a way that's, not working out, what needs to be changed, what needs to be reformed, what needs to be updated, and what ideal do you have in terms of your career and where you're headed, and how are the actions you're taking to get there working or not working, and what needs to change. You might gain clarity over your career goals and your direction. You might take steps to strengthen your authority in that realm. And again, this might unfold over the Mercury cycle, but that's kind of the seed that's being planted. The positive manifestation here is a significant professional milestone or a recognition for your intellectual expertise or the way you communicate. You might be putting a report together that you get acknowledged for. You might be making a speech or making a presentation, very mercurial, 10th house sun things. Be cautious here of overthinking your public image too much or becoming too controlling in leadership roles. Not everything has to be done your way. Let your team members, have input, have say. They might have good ideas. Don't become too dogmatic. Stay flexible, because that's oftentimes, especially in leadership positions, that's the key to progress. For my Aries rising, this is happening, I don't have 11 fingers, so this is happening in your 11th house. It's a fresh start in your alliances, your social connections, your collective goals, your networks, and your long-term aspirations. Mercury and the sun here will emphasize strategic collaboration, intellectual discourse, and you might find yourself forming connections with like-minded people or starting a new group or being involved in a new group who share your vision for innovation or reform or ideals for the future. You might be reworking how your beliefs and your ideas shape what your goals are and what your aspirations are, and how sometimes when we create a new goal or a new aspiration, we need to shift how we believe about it and our perceptions of the world and how things work and our mental structures and concepts, so that we can be more in tune with the goals that we're achieving. This might mean meeting new people, reassessing your social situation, who you hang out with, finding yourself, realigning with different people that are more aligned with what you're trying to accomplish, especially ideologically and intellectually. It has the seeding of this cycle has the potential to bring new opportunities for growth, maybe through mentorship or teamwork or a collaborative kind of group effort. But be careful getting stuck in like abstract idealism or political infighting over the details of a big plan. Try to be more collaborative and understand that, again, people might have different parts of the puzzle that you're missing. So focus on building practical alliances that support mutual progress rather than thinking you know the only thing or you have it all figured out. For my Pisces risings, this is happening in your 12th house of hidden matters, spirituality, isolation, perhaps self-undoing. This is where our thoughts turn inward a little bit, and this conjunction will seed a period of introspection, perhaps spiritual exploration, or behind-the-scenes work. Maybe you're working on yourself on an internal way. Maybe you're confronting some of the ideas or some of the belief structures that you put into place that are undermining you or getting in your way. What beliefs are you holding that, are leading to a little bit of self-undoing? What limiting beliefs do you have? Mercury in the 12th house encourages a deep research and meditation and a confrontation of unconscious patterns. So with Saturn's presence here, he kind of supports a disciplined inner work. It allows you an endurance and a perseverance that'll allow you to overcome any hidden fears or self-sabotaging habits with the 12th house. There might be a tendency here to withdraw a little too much, a tendency to isolate yourself a little too much in this process, and you might lose touch with reality a little bit, or become overwhelmed by the isolation, or become overwhelmed by the subconscious sensory input that might be bubbling up during this Mercury process. So make sure to balance the solitude that you might be, partaking in with a little bit of more intentional engagement when needed. Like, it's okay not to be doing the inner work all the time. It's okay that when you're facing yourself in the mirror and you're seeing kind of, the shadow aspects of yourself, it's okay to put that aside for a minute and understand that you're good enough exactly how you are right now to engage with people and to connect on an emotional and authentic level. And that will actually help you navigate the more deeper, darker, isolated aspects that might be coming up during this time. And there it is, guys. That was my deep dive into the Mercury-Sun conjunction in Aquarius and how it's kind of sparking a new intellectual or systemic cycle for us all in different ways, whether it's looking at your career, your finances, your long-term relationships, or a little bit more something internal or psychological. This moment's all about planting seeds for long-term growth with a focus on clarity, structure, and innovation. What frameworks are not working for us? What big picture plans aren't working, and what needs to be reformed and innovated and revised and changed so that we can embody a more holistic and authentic and truer and better self. With Saturn's influence, these shifts require patience and discipline. It's not about quick fixes or quick wins. It's about building something that lasts. Stay adaptable though, don't lose sight of the core goals and the core alignment of your values. If you watched my Venus-Saturn video, we talked about realigning our values and what are our core values. So hold on to those as we reassess these frameworks, because we should be reassessing these frameworks in terms of our core values. We shouldn't be reassessing these frameworks based on what somebody else said or what I say or what anybody else is doing. We need to check in with what our core values are so that when we create these long-term lasting frameworks ideologically, they're in tune with the values that we established when Venus was conjunct Saturn in Pisces. Now, Pisces is a water sign, so we checked in with our emotions. We are going through the process of, what are my core values? What do I value? How can I establish better values that are more in alignment with my spiritual and emotional needs? And so this Mercury-Sun conjunction in Aquarius is going to build on that, because we want to build, mental frameworks that are aligned with our emotional values. And so they play off each other. I didn't plan that, but it works like that. And so go back and watch my Venus and Saturn conjunction video, because that's a good place to start. The cycle will continue. This Mercury-Sun cycle will continue to unfold, throughout the coming months. And it'll have different tinges, right? Like, it'll have a Piscean kind of tone, then it'll have an Arian tone. It'll have the retrograde tone, back through Aries, Taurus, and Gemini. So But ultimately, the seed being planted is in Aquarius and in that house that we talked about. So keep paying attention to where your life is asking for you to think deeper, plan smarter, and move forward with a purpose and towards your ideals. If this resonates with you, or you want to know more about how these transits might affect your chart in the future, make sure to like this video and subscribe. It really helps. Drop a comment below what rising sign you are and what house this is happening in. I'd love to hear kind of what area of your chart is being lit up, and if any of this resonates with you, whether on a general, mundane level, like we talked about with the politics and the economy and the culture and all that stuff, or even just on a personal level. I'd love to see how this stuff is playing out for you guys. So yeah, I'll talk to you guys later.